Hello there, my name is Brady, and I'm a graphic designer. This is Channel Orange.
Oh, yeah, I'm gonna make myself a hot link when I get home.
Lost.
Really, I think
Sweet life, sweet life.
Life is the
For rich kids with cotton candy. Admit it.
any other channel.
Horses gallop to us, don't know why. No, no,
It's happiness.
Released back in July of 2012, Channel Orange was the debut studio album from the alternative R&B artist as reclusive as he is beloved, Frank Ocean. The album was lauded as the best album of 2012 by several publications, including but not limited to, get ready, the Chicago Sun-Times, Chicago Tribune, Billboard, Entertainment Weekly, The Guardian, the Los Angeles Times, Now, Slant Magazine, Spin, and the Washington Post. And like I said, there are more. What's so effective about the album, regardless of the review you listen to, though, is Frank Ocean's ability to span genres within minutes of one another, both between songs and honestly within the same one a lot of the time. This playful kind of genre bending, as well as the album's overall mastery of curating understandable and accessible vibes and creating iconic grooves, thrust Channel Orange into the neo-soul, alternative R&B, and modern funk classic albums of all time running. And that's kind of a title that it's still defending more than a decade later. However, many fans of the album have been lacking in their understanding and interpretation of the music, namely in the form of posters created by third-party vendors. Shouldn't be a surprise, media literacy is at an all-time low. But still, whether it being the Wave Room or a more creative poster company, many graphics related to the album are pretty stale, which is an observation that's particularly easy to recognize given the amount of time since the album's release. A classic like Channel Orange, though, deserves better. And so in the beginning of 2025, I created exactly that. The first challenge in this project was finding a way to create a visual representation of the auditory experience unique to Channel Orange, which is simultaneously sonically complex and emotionally simplistic. And I don't say that to be derogatory, but most of Channel Orange is at its core kind of an explanation of Ocean's first love, which was Unrequited. And unlike the Channel Orange posters of the past that should rightfully stay there in the past, the primary goal of this project was to find a way of making a music-first poster. We can all agree that Frank Ocean is a very attractive man. I'm not debating that. And his orange BMW M3 is an iconic part of the 2012 Frank Ocean brand. However, the music on Channel Orange specifically doesn't really give a fuck about either of these aesthetic allures, so neither should really be the focal point of a truly considered Channel Orange specific poster. You want a Frank Ocean poster? That's fine. This is a Channel Orange poster, though. So we need to remedy this audio-visual translation. In order to do that, I turned to research. I always turn to research. It's a good practice. Just saying. Research things, please. So Channel Orange's title came from Frank Ocean's experience with grapheme color synesthesia, and specifically was like because of Ocean feeling that while experiencing his first summer love, like I mentioned before, everything was tinted in shades of orange. So this research kind of got to the core of the visual branding, but it also let me know that so Ocean actually rejected himself being the point of the album, like the focal point. So that's why his name and likeness were intentionally left off of the album cover. It's just a cover that says Channel Orange. No Frank Ocean, no picture of him, no BMW, nothing. That was like an important part. So while continuing to scour the internet for other Channel Orange related media of all kinds, be they articles, ratings, videos, etc., one somewhat mundane consistency begins to kind of jump out. And that's that Frank Ocean, for nearly every performance and appearance he had in the media at this time, wore the exact same bandana. He wore it everywhere. And it was a Supreme bandana featuring a Japanese rising sun. And though that's culturally contentious for sure, it's an iconic accessory of Ocean at this time and inspired me to take a look into kind of patterning as a vehicle with which to bring music into a purely visual media. Not because the bandana is patterned, but because when it's rolled, it appears to have a striped pattern. From here, it was pretty easy to divide each song on the album into evenly sized rectangles based on their respective BPM, or beats per minute. And this creates a consistent look across the 17 songs of Channel Orange, while also showcasing their BPM differences through the size and quantity of the modules that are making up each song's overall kind of pattern. So with the bandana tempo system set up, the next logical step was to create a system for the myriad of instruments that the album contains, including the often nostalgic ambient noise that's incredibly prominent on the record, right? You can't really talk about Channel Orange without talking about these tape stop effects and radio tuning and all of these kind of Foley sounds that really give the record a lot of body and give it the kind of like, for lack of a better word, that people love about it, right? So in looking for a way to do this, I discovered a study by Juan Diego Rojas Gomez, Guido Bologna, and Thierry Pun, which looked into the colors that research participants most often associated with different musical instruments, in an effort to provide visually impaired people with a sensory substitution device, or SSD, that's both pleasant to use and intuitive to learn. And they specifically used orchestral instruments, but I modified it a little bit. So, because Frank Ocean, there's strings, but there's also some non-orchestral related things. So from this spectrum that they had, I pulled out the 7 main instrument classes that they cited, and then created a Channel Orange inspired palette to translate the study's RGB wheel of colors into. After this, I modified the study's instruments into sounds more related to Channel Orange, combining some of them into shared categories, and then also kind of creating entirely new groups for kind of vocals, ambient sound, and percussive noises.
Editor Brady here. I realize that some of this graphic is a little bit hard to understand, and so I'm going to give a little bit of clarification. So essentially the way it works is, let's say we're using a clarinet. Clarinets originally are in the orange-red area of the RGB spectrum, so we're starting with that red. In the combination based on Channel Orange, they're combined into the woodwinds area though, which becomes pink, but the woodwinds area, when translated to the Channel Orange palette, becomes this kind of dark, corroded
orange, falling apart orange, rusted orange.
So essentially, that's the way this works. The next step of the process was handling the way sounds themselves would be illustrated, regardless of the source producing them, because we've already handled instrumentation, so now we need to handle sound itself. I'd already decided upon geometric patterns so as to stay in line with kind of the aforementioned bandana approach, right? As far as vocals though, I wanted to treat them differently than the instruments. So in order to avoid disrupting the color patterns of the instruments, all of the vocals of the album were converted into lines of varying width. And these lines are not one-to-one interpretations of the lyrics as a waveform. Instead, they're a little bit more kind of vibe-based, and they're just kind of reproductions of the vocals that allow for harmonies being illustrated, as well as kind of volume shifts and vocal chops, but still look kind of like vocals. The solution came from kind of my own experience with music production, specifically with mixing and mastering stage of music production. In the mixdown stage, producers will equalize or EQ all of the elements of a song in relation to one another so as to create a frequency pocket, they call it, that vocals can exist in. This practice creates songs with vocals that aren't proportionally loud compared to the other instruments, but that can still be heard and understood clearly due to their occupying a different frequency range than the rest of the song. From here, the poster honestly really completed itself, which is to say I still had roughly 15 hours of work ahead of me, since I was breaking each and every song down into its most base rhythms and instruments, and then reconstructing these building blocks into the 17 bars that make up the track list on the poster. So some of the less sonically complex songs took only about a half hour, like Start, Crack Rock, Fertilizer, and Not Just Money. These songs are kind of considered interstitials or skits, but they really don't have a lot of variation. So once you nail down the original pattern, it's pretty easy to replicate that and then do vocal chops and addition of ambient noise and stuff like that throughout the song. What I'm saying is there's a consistent skeleton across songs like this. And then kind of on the other end of the spectrum, there's Pyramids, right? So Pyramids is regarded by many as the best song on the entire album. And it's just a 10-minute epic, honestly, that shifts its instrumental makeup almost as many times as it switches music genres in general. However, Pyramids was also the first song I ever heard from the album and really kind of served as my gateway to an album that became, and honestly still continues to be, one of my personal favorites of all time. I did spend almost 3 hours listening to Pyramids on repeat to ensure that every single detail was caught. And that's a labor of love. I did that because I love it. It was an exhausting, reality bending, kind of sanity warping, hyper fixed, and obsessed labor of love. Yes, but love is love. Love wins. One thing that only
Orange Bunny Channel Tano.
the internet's busiest music nerd and other astute music enjoyers may notice is that the patterns are not, in fact, perfectly translated. Examples of Frank's vocals or instrumentation. And this isn't really like an oversight on my part. Trust me, I'm really into details. Because it was planned from the very beginning, right? I mentioned it before. My intent with this project was to create a system to translate the sonics of the album into the visual world, but also to create an interesting poster while doing so. That was the whole problem in the beginning, was that the posters weren't good. They were fine, but they're not interesting, right? We want to make an interesting one. If I included every single hit of a hi-hat in the drums translation, the appearance of the poster would begin to suffer as a result, right? Translating vocals is kind of another case of the exact same problem. Remember, this whole project, like I said, was created to avoid other companies' kind of one-approach-fits-all sterility, neutralizing the complexity of Channel Orange. I think it's also important to note that kind of as I progressed from song to song, the level of, let's call it like artistic liberty, I took shifted. So, for example, the first version of the opening track, Start, had pretty much almost all of the details of the original song present. It was a really faithful translation of the vocals that were honestly closer to a wave file than an abstract pattern. But then after I tackled more intricate songs, I kind of decided that one-to-one interpretations weren't really working well. One-to-one translations aren't fun. I came back to Start and reworked it through the more kind of interpretive lens that I found to be successful for the other songs. So we didn't really kind of get everything on one pass. The final touch that the poster really needed was a graphic on the bottom, because I had bottom space and I wanted something like purely visual. So I extracted that from images of Frank. I posterized the images of him to create a kind of CRT TV inspired look. and then ran those images through a gradient map to assign the posterized values to the same palette of colors from the instrument song patterns to kind of make it visually consistent. An important part of the gradient mapping process, though, was to ensure that the most prevalent value in each image was translated into the iconic orange from the album cover. Specifically, so as to make the images not stand out too much. The idea is that if the biggest value of them is the same as the background, the image won't stick out like a sore thumb, right? We don't want that. No one wants their thumb sore. And that's pretty much the poster, honestly. Channel Orange is an album that I feel Frank put a lot of care and effort into. And I think I did the same with the poster. And I think if you really care about it, specifically if you're making products that are directly profiting off of the album's success, maybe just put a little more effort in. That's all I'm saying. Because, like, I put in a lot of effort, and it resulted in a poster that I think is really interesting and varied and nuanced. But specifically, though, a poster that invites conversation about the album, because the system isn't immediately clear, right? There's no key on the poster on purpose. I did that on purpose. That's not an oversight. If you haven't heard the album, the patterns won't really make sense, right? And honestly, even if you have heard the album, you might have to listen to it again and take a look at it to kind of fully decipher the color system and the way things work. So if I was to say have this poster, which I do, and I was to put this poster up in my foyer, or I don't have a foyer, to be fair. I don't really know who the fuck is affording kind of a foyer in 2026. Regardless, though, if I have this up in my living room, and friends ask about it because they're over, I, being a fan of the album, can explain the way the poster works, right? Because kind of I know the songs, right? I know the intricacies of the album, and I know the experience that is Channel Orange. And bam.
Bam! There you have it like that, all right?
It opens conversation. And I think that's what good decor should do. And I think putting posters up just because they look cool is fine. Okay? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. This is not some elitist intellectualist standpoint. But also, you can put a poster that looks cool and invites conversation up. Like, those two things aren't mutually exclusive. Because, like, you should want to have conversations about your interests with the people close to you. And if decor lets you kind of segue that naturally, then do it, right? Yeah, I think decor being a catalyst for those conversations is good, and that's why I like the poster. Anyway, thank you for watching, but also listen to Channel Orange. If that wasn't obvious enough already, I think you should listen to Channel Orange. It's really good. You know, I think it's a really great album. Give it a shot. You might find out that you have this whole new genre of music that you actually love. Give it a shot. Also, anyone in the comments talking about Blonde being better, fuck you. Okay? Fuck you, Blonde enjoyers. Okay? Go watch like a Fantano video if you want to talk about how good Blonde is in comparison. Get in his comments, dude. Okay, yeah, Godspeed, great. Okay, Solo, Ivy, White Ferrari, fucking Siegfried, dude. It's a great album. Okay, I'm not saying it's not. I'm not saying that Blonde is a worse album, but for what it was at the time, I think Channel Orange did a lot more in the alternative R&B space, in my opinion. Is it Frank's best album? No. But is it my favorite Frank album? Yes. And that's fine. Fuck off, Blonde stands. Actually, don't fuck off. Don't fuck you. I think you're cool, but like, also just like let people enjoy Channel Orange and Nostalgia Ultra too. I'm sick of the slander, man. Oh, Fantano said it's an 8. Channel Orange was only a 7. Dude, get your own opinion. Oh my god, like something because you like it. How about that? Like, have an original thought. Sorry, I've been watching a lot of Northern Lion recently. I'm getting way too combative about this. Sorry. Anyway, I like Channel Orange. Maybe you will too. Give it a shot.